Is there a significant difference between a visualization that's designed for consumers and one that's designed for business use?
Yeah, I find that there's actually a huge difference because it's when you're designing for enterprise, it's one of those things where like you can choose your friends, but you can't choose your coworkers, right? and so what ends up happening is that there's a lot of variety within that enterprise audience that you wouldn't normally expect. You know, you might be designing an interactive piece for an audience where you've got, you know, iPhone users and people who are still on like brick phones, or you might be renting something still, you know. And then you've also got all different levels of statistical literacy as well. And one of the things that I find in the work that we do at JFK is that because we're doing market research work, the level of statistical literacy in our audience there's a lot of variety within it, and there tends to be very high standards from one very specific part of our population, which tends to be our direct client. So it really changes the way you address a lot of those design issues with that kind of data communication landscape.
Is it harder or just different?
It's different. I mean, I'm a user-centered designer, and so, you know, one of the things that we do a lot of is do audience maps to really get to know what the specific data communication needs are for a given audience. And given that kind of approach, I think it's more you have to take into account different factors, right? So while the form factor is going to be really important if you're doing like a marketing piece and you need to make sure that everything is really glossy and very sexy, when you're dealing with, you know, an online visual data analysis application, which is something that we really specialize in on my team, it's not going to be as flashy, and people are going to take it for granted a little bit more. And, you know, that's just that actually helps to serve the application in the long run from my perspective. So it's just different.
What role do visualizations play within a data-driven organization?
So I think that there's a lot of roles that data visualizations play within a data-driven organization. I think that the biggest impact that data viz has had is actually in allowing populations that have more of a visual mindset. They're more visual learners rather than more abstract learners. It actually sort of unlocks the power of the stats for them,
sure,
right?
Right.
And so that ends up being something that we see a lot of, is that you can take a population that has pretty low statistical literacy, and by presenting them with a visualization, they actually see it and they can understand it. And it's much more accessible than saying, well, we did a factor analysis and you know, you're correlated at a rate of, or like, here are your indices. Right. You know, it becomes much more clear.
Okay. This is a broad and theoretical question, okay? But if you had a chance to build a data analysis tool set for novices from the ground up, what would that look like?
For me, it comes down to a whiteboard and a marker. I'm a big believer in sort of the John Tukey philosophy of exploratory data analysis, where a sense of curiosity and some graph paper is going to serve you a lot better in the long run.
Interesting.
But that's me. I mean, I think when it comes to working with novices in particular, so there's this phenomena in multicultural research of scale usage heterogeneity. Have you ever heard of this? Okay. So essentially what it is that when you're doing multicultural research and you're using Likert scales, and my background is in market research, obviously, otherwise I wouldn't probably be talking about Likert scales, but so one of the things that ends up happening is, there are these 5-point scales that are called Likert scales, and one of the things that we see happen is that different cultures have different levels of comfort in using that particular scale. So the distribution, if you would do histograms of the scale usage and sort of compare them, there's actually a significant difference between the different cultural usages just of the scale itself. And it's a very difficult concept to get people to wrap their heads around in a lot of cases, because it's like, this particular cohort uses this scale differently. Right. They tend to be much more ambivalent, right? Or they tend to, sort of be more neutral than this other cultural cohort. And so I was working on a project with a junior researcher, and we did something as simple as just using conditional formatting in Excel. And for the first time, I could actually see the scale usage heterogeneity, where you could actually see the patterns in the data, and it's a very simple thing, right? I think that one of the big challenges for me with the data visualization field in general is sometimes I think people see this as the like, oh, this is the solution, right? But for me, design is a process; it's not a product, right? So from my perspective, it's much better to be able to have it be a part of your overall methodological toolkit, and to be thinking about, all right, so well, if I graphed this out, what would it look like?
Right.
You know.
Right.
So I'd have to go with graph paper. And
sure. Hey, nothing wrong with that. Last question for you: how do you see the visualization field changing over the next 18 to 24 months? We'll keep it a short horizon.
Yeah, I think we're starting to see. It's very difficult to say, right? But I think I look at it a little bit in terms of Gartner's hype cycle, where like we're sort of in this peak of inflated expectations right now.
Yep.
And so I think that there's a number of different directions that we could end up going in. You're seeing a lot more graphic designers entering the data visualization field, and full disclosure, my background is actually in industrial design, but I fell in love with data like 8 years ago, and so here I am. And I think we're definitely starting to see sort of some levels of specialization happening within the field, and I think that we're going to start to see sort of even more diversity of thought, and I think it's going to be a little antagonistic for a while, actually, because I think we're going to see more conflicts between those who have a very aesthetic point of view and are sort of willing to bend the aesthetic toward versus those that have sort of the more like grounding in the statistical analysis things. One of the things that I'm kind of sad about right now is that we see a lot of infographics and a lot of demand for infographics. And not a lot of talk around, scientific visualizations, and that's really, I miss that about my field in a way. So I think that what we're going to end up seeing as well with, there's been a proliferation of no-code tools, and I think we're going to start to really see sort of two classes of visualization, which are the people who actually, get into the data and embrace the data management steps so that they can do the more refined interactive visualization versus those who are going to be using these no-code tools and end up really having their visualization sort of wagged by the tool set that they use.
So it could be a messy period for a little while here.
I think so. I think it's. I think that there's like a clear benefit, but I think we're going to see a little bit more infotainment and a little less sort of scientific visualization for a little while.
Okay. Well, thank you for being with us. Appreciate you taking the time.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.